Hey, welcome everybody. Appreciate you being here. Really honored to have Dr. Andrew Kaufman with me today. I'm just going to ask him some questions about his past and his journey and just thank him for all the help that I've gained from learning from him over the years. And how's it going today, Andy? Good to be with you.
Yes, going fantastic, Joel. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I've heard Alex Zek say many times that you're the smartest person he's ever talked to and that you have a breadth of knowledge in many, many areas that are surprising. And I'm curious about how you think parents affect, or like if there's a genetic factor to that where your parents super intelligent, do they have high IQs? Does that transfer down do you think that transfers through genetics, or is it an environment in which you were raised in and what your thoughts are on things of that nature and just like how you were as a kid or what kind of schooling you went through?
Yeah, well, this is a complicated thing to answer.
Yeah.
That's certainly for sure. No, I don't think it's genetics. I think that everything we think about genetics is probably wrong. Like, clearly, we do inherit things. And, my father is quite intelligent. Like, he learned how to program in machine language when he was in his 20s, using like hexadecimal code, which is pretty sophisticated. And he's a whiz at crossword puzzles. But I don't think he's applied, that intelligence very broadly, unfortunately. And in a way, like I don't know that he was exactly a model for my intellectual development because of the nature of our relationship. And then there were, like what I really wanted to inherit when I was younger, Joel, was musical talent.
Yeah.
But that all went to my brother, and not me. I only had basic proficiency.
Huh.
So
Well,
that's why I'm not a professional musician now.
yeah.
Although who knows what would have, really happened. But I remember I was just intensely curious. Even as a young child, I always wanted to know how things work, especially with respect to nature. And I got interested in the human body and in medicine. And I think a lot of that was just going to the doctor as a kid, like, and which was really just for, like sick visits, or I had a lot of allergies and went for allergy shots for a period of time. So I was there like every week at the doctor's office, and he had to give the shot because of the nature of it. So I saw him on a weekly basis. And I remember one time like asking him, because I was very, interestingly, I was very fascinated with bacteria and antibiotics.
Huh.
And I asked him about this, and he lent me a book talking about antibiotic resistance and like penicillinase, which is supposedly, an enzyme that degrades penicillin made by certain bacteria to resist it. And I was just overjoyed, like that he would trust me with his medical book. And I, of course, like, read it several times, like immediately and I understood it pretty readily. And then we had a conversation the next time I was at the office about it. So I had this kind of unusual interest. And as I got older, it became more about, because in my, experience in education, I was either acting or learning about like a very narrow area, right? Like even within a subject, a subtopic, etc. But I always wanted to know how these things like fit together in the bigger picture. And I think it's, that kind of thinking ultimately led me to choose forensic psychiatry as a specialty of medicine, because that's where you could really look at many different data points and put everything together and reconstruct it in some big way. And this is of course not a purely scientific endeavor at all. In fact, it can't really lend itself to a purely scientific approach, but it does like involve logic and probability and things like that to try and answer a legal question. And in a way, it's a little bit akin to debating, which I also loved. I didn't have tons of opportunities. Like there was no debate team in my school. I went to public school the whole way. So my mother was a public school teacher. I didn't really get exposed to any special education. I mean, any unique education, other than that system and maybe, some little programs within it. And, college was the first time I was at any kind of private educational institution. But I always, wanted to kind of understand the bigger picture and how things fit together, and wanted to, I enjoyed debating because it required mastery of the knowledge and of the reasoning. And, we had a lot of fun there was one thing I did, it was called Model Congress in high school. And basically different schools would host like an event, and it was usually a weekend, but you would actually have like, you'd be assigned a position, like you're a representative or a senator from a certain state, and then there would be, meetings of the House, meeting of the Senate. You'd get assigned a Senate committee or a House committee. You'd have committee meetings and bring legislation back to the, general body meeting, and try to get it passed by the end. And that was fun because we would try to pass things that were, popular for teenagers, like legalizing pot or changing the drinking age or the driving age, things like that. But it was a chance to make very persuasive arguments. And we always, like, the death penalty was always a subject there as well.
Wow.
So, I really felt like that was a kind of situation or environment that I could, thrive in intellectually. And then I think as I matured and went into my career, I just naturally became, more and more pedagogical, and see myself primarily, as a researcher and educator.
That's cool, man. I'm glad I mean, it's interesting that you went into psychiatry and, I interviewed Kelly Brogan and you kind of have similar backgrounds and that you were embedded in that system. And then you started to maybe see that it wasn't something that would be beneficial for you to stay in and that you could be of service in another way. Did you experience backlash? Or I interviewed Tom Cowan recently and asked him what kind of struggles he had with people projecting or being at odds with him for speaking truth to power. And I was just wondering, I know Kelly's had some intense stuff where she got put on the disinformation dozen. I don't know if you were on that list or not, but just
No, I'm jealous of her for being on that list.
yeah. But was it kind of did you ever go through any struggles with that, with people throwing stuff at you for speaking against the mainstream science?
Well, absolutely. And this is something that probably started long before, I was awake during COVID and speaking out, at that time against mainstream medicine, because I always was somewhat of a thorn in people's sides. If I saw something that I didn't think was right, I would act on it, even if it was unpopular. So, and this actually happened in my psychiatric training, because I realized that they were using the civil commitment law inappropriately. So this is like, psychiatrists are unique among doctors because they have the authority to lock people up against their will, like to take people's freedom away, like jailers.
Wow.
And of course, there are, criteria for this, but they are often fudged in a big ways. And there's the due process rights of the person being committed are very difficult in most states in the country.
Oof.
So I was in the position, that if someone, as a result of their mental illness, was a clear danger to themselves or others, that was the ground to, force them to get treatment in the hospital setting.
Sure.
And they would be forced to do other things while they were there, but that was the main legal thing that, the courts would rule upon if needed. And I realized that when I was at the state hospital in North Carolina, which was like the most difficult rotation that we had, because there was a really high throughput system, lots of patients coming in and out, and you had a lot of overnight call that was super busy. admitting patients like all night long, one after the next.
Wow.
So there was a lot of burnout. But what I realized is that every single patient that came to that hospital was put under commitment.
Mm.
And, that just didn't make sense. Like, how could 100% of their patients, be there against their will? And I realized that what was happening was a number of things. So one of the biggest things driving it was actually the transportation. So these people mostly presented to a community hospital, many times in rural areas, but also in cities. And then if they, for whatever reason weren't appropriate for a private psychiatric hospital, either there were no beds, they didn't have the right insurance, or they were deemed, too dangerous, they would get sent to the state hospital. And they needed to transport them there. And it turns out that using a medical transport like an ambulance is quite expensive. And so they figured out this solution that they could use the police to do this transport. And it's easy for politicians to increase police budget, right? Because it's seen as beneficial by the voting community. And so they use police, but they could only use police when the patient was under commitment. So they basically developed this practice at all the community hospitals. They would put them under the initial commitment, and then we at the state hospital were expected to just back it up like in a rote way. But I realized in talking to many of these people that there was a common scenario that someone would, maybe have an addiction, like, they were an alcoholic, for example, and they got fed up with the pattern. They wanted to get help to get sober. So they would go to their hospital like on a Friday night
Mm.
and say, hey, I need to get clean. Can you help me? Can you get me into a detox bed or something like that? And then they would go through this exercise. Oh, are you having any, thoughts about suicide? No, I just want to get sober. Well, if you ever would think about suicide, how would you do it? And they're like, oh, I'm not thinking about it. Well, just hypothetically, right? Oh, I would. This was a real example. Oh, what was it? There was something related to. Oh, here's another funny example. I am allergic to duck, so I would go and order Peking duck at a Chinese restaurant and die from an allergic reaction.
Whoa.
Okay, so then that person would then transcribe that suicide plan onto the commitment paperwork, but say that it was an active plan,
Jeez.
and that would justify the commitment. So I started letting people sign in voluntarily to the
Mm.
hospital if they wanted voluntary treatment and such. And this got me a lot of flack, a lot
Yeah.
of flack.
Wow.
But it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a real. It's really scary to hear the dark side of the psychiatry industry, the mental institutions, and just the drugs and all of that.
Well, it's very dark, and actually, Corbett Report just did a really fine documentary on this issue
Oh,
that
cool.
I would definitely encourage people to look at. But I've seen some of that stuff in the trenches.
Yeah. And so, had you woken up to the deceptions in college or after, or at what point did you start to look deeper into all the psyops and the media and really just discover how deeply, yeah, complex this has become as far as the misleading of teachings in academia and across the board?
Well, this really didn't happen for me until around the 2010 era.
Okay.
And so it wasn't, after 9/11. And it was really what happened is that I had this old friend from college, and he saw me posting on Facebook about like climate change because I was
Hmm.
always, since I was young, I've been, concerned about nature and about pollution and such. And I bought into, the global warming narrative.
Yeah.
And I was even, involved in some activist groups, and they were very well-meaning people, right? They didn't seem like people who were fooled or had any ill intent.
Mm.
But my old friend from college, he was awake, and he was trying to like kind of tell me that that's not how it seems and such, and I was very resistant. And this went on for maybe about 6 months, and then I experienced a couple of like kind of tragedies. One was my brother's death, my younger
Mm.
brother.
Sucks.
And I was in a different state of mind in the wake of those life events. And I was questioning everything, but I decided I was going to prove my old friend wrong, and I was going to go like deep into the research and show him how,
Yeah.
global warming was a real thing and such. And of course, once I did that, what I found was the opposite. That all the evidence that was in support of it was essentially fabricated or a computer model, and many things were problematic, and that really started me on a full path to examine every issue,
Mhm.
and
Oh,
it made a major transition in my life, and also was the downfall of my marriage.
oh man, I bet. Yeah, that's a can be really hard to come out of the hive mind. You can lose a lot of friends and family and things. That's kind of a I guess that's kind of my question too. Like, did you go through a spiritual journey in having to extract yourself, or did you, sort of expand your consciousness? And did you have any sort of religion or spiritual practices that opened up because of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, I have to give credit to my friend Jonathan, because he once I started talking about some of these dark truths, he said it's really important to balance this out
Yeah,
with a spiritual path, and to me that first sounded new agey, because
sure.
that's really the only experience I had to it. But he introduced me to the work of Neil Kramer, who's a spiritual teacher. And I ended up attending a conference of his. I met some great people. We instantly developed some fellowship. And I essentially then started working with Neil as a mentee for a couple of years. And that kind of coincided with the divorce that I was going through. And it really kind of, I was initiated really, or I initiated myself into a real, authentic spiritual past. And looking back, not only was it necessary for me to learn the lessons from my failed marriage, but really prepared me for the work ahead. Like everything that I was able to achieve, facing lots of adversity during COVID as, sort of a whistleblower, of whatever you want to call it, I had done the work to prepare myself. So when there was like a mass of people in my life rejecting me, and including my parents,
Mm,
not all of them, but
mm,
some of them, like I was excommunicated for a period of time.
yeah,
And of course, all my friends that I had gone through medical education with and such, some of them were pretty angry at me. And but I was, totally prepared for that. I didn't take it personally. I took advantage of new relationships and started to blossom those. So I was essentially like trading, a community based on programming to a community based on truth. So I look at it as an overall advantage. But of course, it's when you have relationships and share things with people, it's always some pain involved in the end of that.
yeah. Oh man. Yeah, well, I'm glad you appreciate the knowledge you've shared with so many people, and you and Tom and Kelly have been really helpful for me. And I kind of didn't realize the virus side of things until 2020. I didn't trust vaccines. I figured my allergies came from vaccines. I don't know if that's true, and wanted to ask you about that. But yeah, 2020 was a time that really not only opened me up to the fact we were being lied to and deceived. I looked into how they did the model as to how to determine the percentage of people, and I could tell by the information that they had tweaked that model. And now I realize there's no basis for the model to begin with. It's just all a fabricated thing based on PCR and things that are, obviously manipulative. But yeah, did you go back and start studying all this stuff on chemo and the reality about the medical industry during that time? And what are your thoughts on vaccines, allergies? What were your allergies, do you think? How did they start as a kid?
Well, I mean, let me say that I actually already had been, researching all of those aspects of medicine before COVID.
Okay.
And some of it is based on experience. I worked earlier in my career in cancer medicine,
Uh,
and I saw the reality, that no one got better.
yeah,
And I saw how the drugs were so toxic. So, I had a head start. Now, I did delay looking into vaccines a bit because I had kids and they were vaccinated at a young age. And basically, I waited till the next vaccines were due.
sure.
And then I said, no more. And there haven't been any since then. Um, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the
Oh,
thrust of your
just
question now.
yeah, I was just wondering if you think allergies are
Yeah,
associated.
that's right. Allergies. So, certainly your allergies could be related to that, but I've learned something really fascinating about allergies actually in my study of natural healing. And Jennifer Daniels, Dr. Jennifer Daniels was the first one that I heard this from, but she was saying that allergies are actually related to a problem with your liver.
Mm,
And, that was completely foreign to me. Turns out, by the way, that, this connection is not so surprising when you start to look at the research literature.
mm,
And what I've been able to find, and although, no one in mainstream medicine thinks this is the case, no one's interested in researching it because they, think that allergies are an immune system problem,
right.
right? And there is really no immunity that's ever been proven, separate topic. But we do have some really interesting data. So, especially children, but even some adults who get a liver transplant,
Mm,
if the donor had allergies or asthma and the recipient didn't, after the transplant, the recipient then develops allergies or asthma or both.
wow.
And this is, most prominent with liver transplants. It occurs at a much lower frequency with some other transplants, but the other transplants are almost all connected to the liver. So there could be some liver tissue
Mm,
that goes along with it, theoretically, or some kind of other similarity.
mm,
Then you have, in addition, looking at people with a fatty liver. And there's one study I could find looking at asthma. And the asthma not only correlates with fatty liver, but the severity of fatty liver has a higher correlation with asthma. And then when I first tried to address this myself, I was experimenting with the Gerson protocol, which is really mostly applied towards cancer patients.
mm,
But it's principally coffee enemas, which address the liver, and juicing are the two big interventions. And with just 2 weeks of 2 coffee enemas a day, I was able to reverse my food allergies that were present since childhood.
wow. That's good to know. I recently got my allergies resolved, and I don't know if this is the reason, but I've been on the carnivore diet, and it's just made my life so much easier. And I don't know if I wanted to ask you if you recommend not staying on the carnivore diet too long, or all that. But I definitely am so
No,
glad.
I recommend staying on it as long as you like because it provides, full, complete nutrition. And it certainly, depending on, exactly what you ate,
Yeah,
but if you did one of the, relatively stricter versions of it, especially, it could definitely fit with healing the liver injury.
okay.
Because, essentially it's like, if you do it right, and I would suspect that you did, it's an elimination diet,
Yeah,
right? Because there's nothing in the meat that you would eat that could affect your health adversely in any way.
yeah.
And also I did a day-long conference last June, and it was a little bit under the radar. It wasn't super popular, but It was called Reverse. And what I had tried to do was to find real evidence of what are the ingredients that can lead to us living as long as possible and as healthy as possible. And, part of that is how long are we actually supposed to live?
Okay.
And I'll tell you, there are many, many documented cases of people living more than 120 years and even more than 150 years, which I think many people would be surprised about. And these are, legitimate, validated examples, not just, people making it up. But there's no, modern research really that speaks to this or could speak to this. Like using epidemiologic data is really, really messy, and I mean, so much in nutrition is misunderstood because of that, right? Like for example, the China study saying, meat causes colon cancer,
Yeah.
right? That's a completely bogus finding. And if you look at, exactly how they made that claim, you'll see it's pretty ridiculous.
Mhm.
So what I realize is that if you look back historically to when Westerners started sending like teams of researchers or scientists to indigenous cultures, and some of this goes back several hundred years, and some of it is even within the middle of the 20th century. They have documented and described many, many different cultures, in the Americas, in Asia, in Africa, where they essentially didn't know disease at all in their life.
Wow.
Like, no birth complications, birth defects, no childhood, malformations, no childhood illness. Like people that died prematurely pretty much only died of accidents and trauma.
Mm.
There were no infectious diseases that were plaguing the West, no cancer, no heart disease.
Mm.
And, people, if you see photographs of these people, they look like Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
And if you look at their diets, which I believe, is one of the most important factors for those health outcomes, they all ate predominantly meat.
Yeah.
Now they weren't. Now, if you look up in, the people in the far north, right, in Arctic climates, they are almost obligate carnivores because there's
Yeah.
no plants to eat in their environment. But most of these people did, they planted some crops, but they ate these things seasonally. They gathered some berries, they ate them, seasonally and locally, not like today. And the fruits and vegetables that they did eat were not hybridized over hundreds of years into something that doesn't, resemble nature. But they all expressed a strong value for animal flesh because they must have just known through their own experience that that's what keeps you healthy and vibrant.
Mm. Yeah, it's been a life change for me energetically, like the my capacity to, go a long time without sleep. I don't feel drained, I don't feel inflammation, I don't experience sluggishness from eating. Eat really good steaks. I only eat twice a day. I eat eggs, ground beef, and steak, and that's all I eat, and with a lot of butter. And um, yeah, it's just been so incredible that I just don't feel the need to do anything else. So I'm really glad to have discovered that. I listened to you and Bart K talk, and he's pretty extreme. He's hardcore about it. He likes to yell at people. I think it's just a sort of a ruse that he uses to keep his channel interesting. But
Yeah,
I
and he'll admit that, but I was a little bit afraid at first when he invited me on, but he was, I mean, we agreed about most things, so,
yeah, yeah.
and, actually, he might have even been slightly intimidated that talking to someone who actually knows something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to I don't listen to him anymore. I got a little turned off by the intensity, but I did learn a lot and just realized that people can thrive without carbohydrates, and it's just good to know that you don't need to have these inflammatory foods. And I just don't have to like exercise or anything to keep my body the way I want it to. I mean, I do a lot of push-ups and walking a lot, but I don't have to worry about my gut extend or getting belly fat on the carnivore diet, and it's just such a nice thing to not have to fight that. But
Right. Well,
energetic
there's a teaching point here, if you don't mind, and because
is,
this is actually something that Bart taught me originally, and he emphasizes this all the time. But it's called the Randall cycle, and it's not really a cycle, but this is like a switching mechanism. And in our metabolism, you know that we can metabolite carbohydrates, right? Even though we don't need them, our body can make them,
yeah.
and we can metabolize fat.
Mm,
And but it turns out that we can't do both at the same time. We can do, we have to switch one or the other. It's kind of like, either we use jet fuel or we use unleaded, fuel.
yeah, yeah,
So when you eat a mixture of carbs and fats in a meal,
mm,
your body now has both substrates of metabolism, right? Carbohydrates and fats.
yeah.
In that situation, what it's going to do is it's going to metabolize the carbohydrates and store the fats. And that's how you end up storing fat.
Got it. Wow.
Whereas, so if you ate a vegan diet,
Sure.
you also wouldn't be worrying about belly fat. Now, you
Right.
would get malnourished
Yeah.
if you didn't do certain things to supplement yourself and such. Is very difficult. But for weight loss purposes or for controlling the belly fat, like either of those, like a high carb, very low fat diet will work,
Okay.
or a zero or very low carb, high fat diet will work.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I asked Dr. Tom Cowan the same thing, and he didn't agree with Bart's assessment. He thought that it's more about the quality of the food and that food combination isn't a problem. So I'm glad that I'm glad that you agree with me, and because I feel from I did the fruit diet and it was great until it became a problem. I did, I've tried everything, and I
Yeah, we
I
both. I think we both done this. Like I've
yeah,
done the fruit diet for about 6 weeks,
yeah,
and I've done vegan and vegetarian diets as well.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I think food combination, I learned this at a young age that food combination is a thing. Even mixing certain fruits like watermelon, it ferments differently than other fruits. And if you're careful, then you don't have any problems with fermentation in the gut. So I think there is something to that. But I get where Tom's coming from that Western Price doesn't address that, and he's had success with the diet that he's been on, so he doesn't see it as an issue. But I'm glad to hear your feedback on that.
Well, I think, it depends on what your goals are and
Yeah,
how you define, what's successful. I try to explain this as much as possible by thinking about how things are in nature. And
yeah,
if you would, think about like what an existence would be like if we didn't have agriculture or modern food production,
mm,
you would either and have to go and gather
yeah,
whatever is in season and harvestable,
sure,
right? And things that we would be able to eat, like fruit or berries, they have definitely have a season, right? When there's fruit, and then it ripens, and then it's gone until next year, or maybe it's more frequent in the tropics, but it has a limited season. So, or you would hunt animals.
yeah,
So if you hunted an animal, you would then be the meal would be that animal flesh. It would
yeah,
be one thing, right?
totally.
And so your body can then optimize digestion and absorption of that one thing, right? Sort of like a special purpose.
Yeah,
It's like, go back to the analogy of a car. If you have a car but you want to go off road, what
mm,
do? You actually change the car. You might put on different tires. You might let the air out of the
yeah,
tires, right? You might put it in four-wheel drive mode, right? And those things would slow you down on the street, but they're necessary in that environment. So our digestion has also special things, like it has a whole mechanism to digest fat that's very different from digesting carbs. We start to digest carbs in our mouth,
mm,
right? But fat is not until the small intestine.
mm,
So kind of different system. So you have one thing. Now, if your favorite berries were in season, you would go and you would harvest all those berries, and you'd make, probably, at least if you're anything like my family, you'd eat them right there.
Yeah.
But even if you could contain yourself and bring them back, right, then you'd have a meal with just those berries,
Mm,
right? Where you wouldn't have a fruit salad
right.
because that requires like a international distribution system
Yeah.
of, getting all these fruit from different places that are cultivated when they're not in season and greenhouses and such, and then putting them together. So you wouldn't be able to eat watermelon with strawberries
Yeah.
and oranges, right? But you can find all those three in the grocery store simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes so much sense to me. And I've listened to Bart explain that too, just the different ways in which we used to eat. And I think there's something to having been nomadic potentially, and then all of a sudden being able to grow all this food, staying put, sort of becoming more domesticated, and having access to so many different things all at once. So I consider the standard American diet to be kind of life-threatening as far as how long one could live, if we're not careful and paying attention. And
Well, you
oxalate.
can
Sorry,
you
go
can
ahead.
see the lifespan going down now, right?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
the flawed way that they calculate it.
Yeah.
And, to be fair, like, Tom's idea about if you eat natural whole food,
Sure.
you can't go wrong. And like I agree with that to some degree. Like that diet is not going to cause you major health problems.
Right.
But the processed food,
Yeah.
right, the chemicals used to produce the food, those are the things that will definitely make you sick.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had a friend that was trying to do for a long time. He was on almond milk and eating lots of nuts, and he was just trying to follow a protocol to get healthy, and it was just making him sicker and sicker. He finally realized what was wrong, and he switched to carnivore, and he had full organ failure, and he almost died from being a workaholic and eating terribly. And he's one of the most vibrant people I've ever met, and he's so strict now because he got so close to being dead that he's just really extreme with it. But yeah, his energy levels are through the roof. And so as far as getting oxalates out of your body, he says they're stored in your bones. And that when you get on a elimination diet, carnivore diet, that it starts to detox and it can be quite uncomfortable if you've stored a lot of oxalates. So I just wonder if you could add to that, like if are oxalates a problem?
Well, like I agree with everything you said, except for the word oxalates. So now, oxalates, right, are plant defense chemicals. There are a number of different varieties, right? This is one that's said to that it can cause these very sharp crystals that can damage your tissue and such. I'm not sure that there's actually strong evidence of that.
Okay.
There may be, and I'm just naive to it, but the process that when you eat a very, very clean diet, which I might call an elimination diet, right? And usually it's a very strict diet. Like even if it's a carnivore diet, it generally wouldn't include dairy, for
Right.
example. It may not even usually doesn't even include fish or poultry.
Right.
So it's a stricter version. And a vegan elimination diet also, it wouldn't include nuts like almonds, generally speaking. It wouldn't include legumes. It would be very limited, if any, grains.
Yep.
So, very kind of strict diet, anything that could possibly cause any problems. And that allows your body to go into a healing mode where it can start to because you're not giving new toxins to
Mhm.
the body can then start to get rid of what it's already storing. And there are definitely things that have been shown to be stored in the bone, like actually lead, for example, is one of those things.
Wow.
It could be oxalates. I'd have to confirm that with the research. But when you go on this diet, whatever the toxins are that are stored in your body, your body can now start to eliminate them. And you
Yep.
can actually enhance this with other procedures, like enemas, for example. So if you did carnivore plus enemas, it would be even, amplified the degree of healing or the speed of healing. And what you described there is that it didn't feel good. That's what I would call a cleansing reaction. And
Yep.
that's something that enemas can actually help prevent or reduce, because once your body starts pulling out these stored toxins, then they are go into your circulation, And if your body is able to then eliminate them, like into the toilet or into your sweat or whatever, they're not going to then cause any problems. But if they get stuck circulating around your blood, like maybe you have some impaction in your bowels and it's slow moving there,
Right.
that's when you get these kind of cleansing type of symptoms. But in terms of the place that they're most likely stored in your body, I think, certainly, there are things stored in all over your body, depending on, because some things may have an affinity for certain parts of your body, like with lead and the bone, for example.
Mm.
But many of the things that our bodies can't readily eliminate on their own are actually fat soluble. And like our liver is charged with the tasks of trying to convert fat soluble chemicals to water soluble so they can be eliminated. And this is even a problem with lots of pharmaceuticals, that they're too fat soluble that the body can't even absorb them. And they have to do various chemistry to reduce that. And these have been shown in many studies to be stored in your fatty tissue. And so if you have belly fat, that's where they are. If you're one of those people who can eat anything you want and never get belly fat, then they're in the fat around your internal organs, which is worse for your health. Might be
Wow.
better for your appearance, but worse for your health.
Okay.
So if you go on a diet that's an elimination diet and it's a lipolytic diet, meaning that it's going to lead to breakdown of fat tissue,
Mm.
then when that fat tissue breaks down, it's going to then release those stored fat soluble toxins. And, just to give some examples, these are things like PFAS chemicals, for example, flame retardant chemicals,
Okay.
and a variety of insecticides and pesticides that are used on crops.
Yeah.
Even things like DDT is still found like in people's bodies, even though it's been off the market for decades and decades.
Wow.
So when you do this, the fat starts breaking down, and these things start leaving your body. They can cause cleansing symptoms on the way out, but
Sure.
eventually you'll get rid of them. And there have been some, incredible healing stories that you can find anecdotally related to the carnivore diet. I mean,
Yeah.
beyond the, Michaela Peterson, but just like regular people, like they've talked about, coming off dialysis,
Yeah.
reversing all kinds of terminal health conditions just from doing a carnivore diet or a strict carnivore type diet for a prolonged period of time.
Wow. Um, a lot of friends, I asked Tom the same thing, and we didn't quite go into the details, but a lot of people uh, that I know have autoimmune, supposedly thyroid conditions from supposedly sexual abuse. And there seems to be a correlation that people tie to that, and then metabolism challenges, and then they end up on thyroid medication. Do you think the carnivore diet is a solution to get off that medication and to heal the thyroid?
So I think what we're dealing with is something totally different, which is that none of those people actually have thyroid disease.
Okay.
And this is something I got clued into when I was still practicing psychiatry, because I was working at this special psychiatric emergency department in Syracuse. And I had students, medical students there under me. It was just, part time, and a very hectic place, very stressful place. But I was noticing that like half of the people who showed up there were on thyroid hormone.
Mm.
And, I learned when I was in PA school is when I first learned about thyroid disease. And our professor was like the chair of this endocrinology department. And he was like, near retirement age, or maybe he was even like a semi-retired professor at that point. But he had a world of experience.
Yeah.
And he really like, emphasized certain points. And he said basically, virtually everyone who has a hypothyroidism, a low thyroid, it's because they were treated for high thyroid with surgery or radioactive iodine. And then he said, there's this really rare thing, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but don't really worry about it. You'll never see it.
Mm.
And then that's what everybody, supposedly had is this rare Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So, as I researched this, I began to learn a few things. One is that your thyroid lab values can become abnormal when your thyroid is normal. And
Wow.
this happens when you have an acute illness. In fact, they call it sick euthyroid syndrome because you're sick, your thyroid's normal, but your labs are abnormal.
Mm.
And it can happen with a psychiatric crisis, even an
Wow.
addiction crisis,
Wow.
right? Which we think of as not even physical.
Yeah.
And what happened was is that there's this like rule in psychiatry that you want to, if you're going to take care of someone for depression or whatever, you want to make sure they don't have like a medical illness masking as depression, even
Wow.
though that never happens in practice. It's only a textbook thing. But they make you get certain lab tests to rule that out. And one of them is the thyroid test. And
Mm.
so, but they didn't know that the thyroid test would be abnormal because of depression.
Mm.
So what would happen is the test would be a little bit abnormal, and they would then put them on thyroid hormone, and they
Mm.
would stay on thyroid hormone for the rest of their life
Yeah.
when they never had a thyroid problem at all.
Wow.
Now, since I've been doing natural healing consultations, I've had several dozen people come to me that were taking thyroid hormone that wanted to get off of it, like you described. And every time I interviewed one and asked them about how it was diagnosed, not one of them had any symptoms of thyroid disease. And there
Wow.
are very specific symptoms. They all just had, basically a lab test that said it was abnormal, and then they got put on it. And every single one of those people who wanted to was able to get off the thyroid hormone and never look back. And it wasn't dependent on doing a carnivore diet, although I think that it's good to make sure that you have iodine and selenium in your diet, some extra of
Okay.
that, because your body is now, when you take the thyroid hormone, the synthetic one, it suppresses your body's natural production of thyroid hormone. So
Right.
it's essentially put you in a state of low thyroid,
Huh.
and you have to bring your thyroid back to health. So there's ways that you can actually help cleanse the thyroid itself, and then you can make sure you have selenium and iodine, which I recommend getting from food, by the way. And you can get iodine from most seafood. Selenium is in Brazil nuts. It's in shilajit.
Okay.
So in a variety of things. And all those folks have no problem getting off the thyroid hormone. Even
Wow.
some of them took it for 20 years or more and got off of it, no problem. And I didn't recommend that they do any specific diet with that other than a clean diet.
Wow. Oh, that's good news. Do you offer still, or is your schedule too tight do you take on new clients or do you meet with people one on one?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I do continue to do, educational consultations,
Great.
and for a variety of topics, but mostly for health issues.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very rewarding. But I also teach about health to, larger groups of people.
Sure.
And so I have pretty frequent workshops on particular topics. Like the most recent one was called Removing Heavy Metals.
Yeah.
And they come with a detailed protocol of, how you can address that health issue and what materials are shown in the research to be very helpful. And what I've been doing is having like a cohort so people can come into like a private community setting
Mm.
and support each other while they're going through that. And I'll do some extra educational aspects, like an extra question and answer session. So as people are going through it, if they hit any stumbling blocks or not sure what to do next, I can provide that information. And for the removing heavy metals, I'm going to do a mini masterclass just talking about the mercury fillings. Like if you have them, what do you do? Do you need to worry about them? Do you need to get them out? If you do, how do you do it safely? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I had all mine removed, but I never did a protocol. I just was with a very knowledgeable dentist. He was very careful, but I'll definitely look into what you would suggest since it's been a long time since I've had them removed. I may have trapped some stuff in my system and need some solutions there.
Well,
Yeah.
some people like yourself do it and everything goes smooth, and
Yeah.
other people, it can turn into a nightmare. So,
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess with your psychiatry background, you mentor people when it's not when it's not the physical stuff, but actual like, unresolved emotional stuff or any challenges with just depressions and things like that. Is that something you're available for as well?
well, I don't really look at it that way exactly because the way I see it is that every problem that we have has different components. And I usually like to talk about the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual
Yeah.
components. And there may be, a problem that manifests mostly as a psychological or behavioral thing, but it
Mhm.
could be caused by something purely physical, or it could be a combination of multiple factors, and vice versa. That there could be a psychological cause that's experienced predominantly in a physical way.
Yeah.
Mainstream medicine doesn't account for this at all. They compartmentalize these things, although they want to say that even mental illness is caused by a physical problem,
Mhm.
but they choose one that actually is not really an issue. Like it's just a theoretical story. But in reality, we all are, those three aspects of us are interacting and interplaying. And, even just a simple thing, if I say, okay, here is a protocol that if you do this, you'll improve your health. Well, that's all wonderful, but then, that person who then took that has to take it and say, okay, well, am I going to do this? Like,
Right.
what's it going to be like? What if I can't, eat Cheetos every day?
Yeah.
Like, am I willing to do that? Is it going to cause me pain? Am I going to suffer and crave
Yeah.
Cheetos the whole time? Right. So you can't ignore those aspects.
Right.
And if you ever worked in a hospital, you'd see those things come out with bad behavior, like when patients
Yeah.
are placed in this restrictive environment and they're not in
Right.
control and they don't feel well, that they show some ornery aspects of their character.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I admit to really struggling with fasting at times in my life and knowing I needed to, and then going through a resistance to it because it's confronting. There's an emotional process that starts to happen. You start to like have to realize that you've been coping with food and that food has become an
Yeah.
addiction for most of us because as little kids, that was the way that we processed or covered up our feelings. So I
Yeah,
agree.
we were taught to do that, right? We were taught food is love, like
Yeah,
when, your relatives, give you a treat and such.
yeah, yeah. And then just the last couple minutes here, if you can fit it in, the immune system is such a commonly used term and I've heard you and Tom talk about that, there's no proof that we have an immune system. And is there a word to replace that? Is there constitution? If people are born with stronger this, that, or the other that you could attribute it to?
Well, let me clarify a little bit because, like, in terms of, do we have like cells and tissues in our body that are, that would be called the immune system? Like, yes, we do. Like, lymph nodes are real,
Yeah,
white blood cells are real,
yeah,
right? All of those things. Um, so I'm not, denying any of that, but I'm saying that the function that we're told that they carry out is not actually borne out by the research. So
yeah,
this idea of becoming immune to germs.
yeah,
Now, one would have to say, ask how is that even possible when germs don't cause
yeah,
illness to begin with?
yeah,
The antibodies, are first of all the gentleman. I think it was a South American scientist who discovered antibodies, and they are real proteins,
yeah,
but they're attributed with all these properties that are completely unproven. Like they're supposed to be specific for like a single you know, substrate that they bind.
Mm,
But if we look at the experiments, this isn't the case at all. They actually bind many, many things.
mm,
And what when I look at the evidence that's available and what they do, what they've been observed, or you can clearly see that they do things like phagocytosis, like some of the types of white blood cells, for example, how the lymph drains tissues, that they essentially seem like a system to manage any substance that may be damaging to the body. So that could be like tissue that is breaking down or dying. Any foreign things that come into our body, like if they invade through trauma, like
mm.
an injection, a bite, a stabbing,
Yep.
whatever foreign material comes in, that the immune system is responsible for managing that,
Yep.
right? If we are poisoned, through our breath,
Mm,
through our food, through our skin, the the immune cells would come in, process those things, and help remove them and neutralize them. Like when you get, it's been shown that when many people get it, vaccinations with aluminum hydroxide, the so-called adjuvant,
yep.
that the our immune cells actually create essentially a rubber room or a toxic storage site
Mm,
called a granuloma. And
mm.
this is like basically a contained pocket in the tissue that would contain that material,
Wow.
right? To sequester it so it can't damage other parts of the body. So I think it's more like the waste management system or the physical plant of the body, perhaps. It's not a catchy name. I haven't like tried to come up with a catchy name to beat the immune system,
Yeah.
but it also like because of this, if you look into it, you'll find out, all this material. It really does kind of irk me when people talk about natural healing and say that it boosts your immune system.
Yeah.
Because even if the immune system really did function in the way that we said, that still is a meaningless claim, because there's no measure of how boosted the immune system is that you could say, it went from a 3 to a 5. Like,
Yeah.
it's just marketing language. So people out there, stop saying that.
Appreciate the clarity you bring to the world, and yeah, it's really helpful to understand deeper levels of this stuff, and yeah, just get to know what the body's such an incredible, it's so incredibly capable of detoxing and healing itself, and it's just amazing to get to the simplicity of it, and yeah, come out of those old
Yeah,
stories.
it's a self-healing system. And just next time you get a little cut on your skin,
Mm,
take a picture of it every day,
yeah,
and you'll just see what the body is capable of doing,
totally.
right? Without you taking any pills.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Andy. If there's anything you want to add about what you're offering these days, or books, or any way to reach you, yeah, we'll close up here.
Sure thing. Well, I am working on a book, but I'll let you know about that launch later. But everyone, just please go to my website, andrewkaufmanmd.com, sign up for the free Ultimate Detox Protocol, which you can get just by leaving your email address, and then you will be, notified of all my future offerings, many which are free. We give, information about new interviews and podcasts that I do, such as this one. Any, of course, workshops that are coming out new, even when I'm traveling to events, like I'm about to go to Weston A. Price Conference next week. So, if you want to come there, and it's a great event. And of course, I would love to meet everyone in person. So that's the best way to stay on top of what I'm doing these days.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate it, Andy. Good to speak with you today. Thanks for taking the time, man.
My
Well,
pleasure, Joel.
all right, everyone. Much love.